Alright, let's get started with the part 2 from the first topic, research theories, types of research. And you can take my bet for this. At least 2 questions out of 5 that will come from research will come from just this particular topic. So let's get started. I've completed the first topic, which is research concept and the different types of research paradigm. If you want to watch this video, then you can check out the playlist for UGC Net Paper 1, where I'm gonna be covering the entire chapter starting from teaching aptitude to higher education. All premium videos freely uploaded here in YouTube. And if you like the videos, do share, like, and subscribe. It will really help me. Thank you. For today, let's get started with types of research. Under types of research, we have descriptive research, which is of 9 types. We have experimental research, which is of 3 types and has about 3 subparts each. We have action research, one of the most important topic, and I'm guessing more than 10 questions have appeared just from action research. Approach to research and applied and fundamental research as well. So let's get started. Topic 1, Descriptive Research. Descriptive research involves observing and describing the characteristics of behavior. So, mind this word, observing. It's a key term which describes what descriptive research is. Alright, observing of a population, phenomenon, or a situation without influencing. It aims to provide a comprehensive snapshot of what's happening, often through surveys, observations, or analysis of existing data. It's like reading a book where you read whatever the author has written, form a bigger picture, and try to understand it. Fictionally and in real life, reading a real life scenario and then forming a research based on that without much manipulation. For example, conducting a survey to understand the demographic makeup and preference of customers visiting a particular store without attempting to change their behavior. Economic survey of India would be a descriptive research that gets done. You just get asked couple of questions without changing any behavior. So what's the importance behind descriptive research? One, it helps us understand behavior and traits. For example, a study examining the eating habits of teenagers, including frequency of fast food consumption. So, you're observing the behavioral pattern here. Next, it helps us find out opinions and attitudes. For example, the economic survey or the population survey, surveys on happiness. A lot of economic survey, psychology survey is based on descriptive research. Trend measurements, comparisons, a comparative studies between urban rural schools or smokers versus non-smokers. Next is data analysis, where you collect a lot of data and then you try to observe the analysis through the data. So, the first type of descriptive research, which is observational research, it's basically observing your participants in a natural environment. A lot of anthropological studies are based on descriptive research. If anybody has read Freakonomics, there's a lot of descriptive research done derived in the most interesting way possible. So do check it out. What's the usage in research? This method helps to gather data on behaviors, interactions, or conditions as they naturally occur. For example, a researcher observing children's play behavior in playground to study social interactions. Next, we have survey research. It involves collecting data from sample, which is there in the name itself, through questionnaires, interviews, or polls to gather information on attitudes, opinions, behaviors, characteristics. Like I said in the beginning, economic survey of India would be one. And there's bunch of other survey questions. I'm pretty sure you have filled a few surveys here and there. So they all come under descriptive research. It's commonly used in social science, market research, public opinions. For example, conducting a survey to measure customer satisfaction with a new product. It's quite quantitative because surveys include collecting a lot of data and analyzing it. Next, we have case study. It involves in depth analysis of single individual group, event, or a situation. So you have a particular case and you do an in-depth analysis. For example, a case study on Tesla's management, or a case study on Apple's management. It is used when a detailed and holistic understanding of a particular case is needed, often in psychology, education, or business research. Content analysis. It is a systematic method for analyzing the content of communication, such as text, media, or documents. It's usually used by media folks and news channels. So, this research is used to interpret and quantify the presence of certain words, themes, or concept in qualitative data. For example, analyzing news articles to study media representation of climate change, or when the entire farmer crisis had happened, it would come under content analysis. Next, we have casual comparative research or ex post facto research. A lot of questions have come from ex post facto research in the past couple of years. So let's understand. It examines the cause and effect relationship between variables by comparing two or more groups that differ on a particular variable. Now, don't get confused with experiment research. Experiment research involves one variable being changed and then comparing it with the other variable. Remember, descriptive research, you're not changing anything, you're merely observing it. So, in causal comparative, although you're comparing two variables, but you're not changing any one variable, it's not an experiment, it's an observation. Okay, so it is used when it is unethical or impractical to manipulate the independent variable, often in education or social science. For example, studying the impact of different teaching methods on student performance by comparing classes taught by different methods. So, one could be discussion method, how helpful it is in students, whether the critical thinking grows, versus lecture method, which would be helpful for students at what age. So, this is a comparative study. Next, we have correlation research. Correlation research examines the relationship between two or more variables to determine whether they are associated or correlated. Pretty much the same way how correlation works. So, it is used in research to identify and measure the strength and direction of relationship between variables without inferring causality. For example, here we can have hours of studying, and here we can have exam scores. So if you study more, if you study 8 hours, if you study 9 hours, will your exam score also increase in the same pattern? And there could always be anomalies, because you can sit in front of a book and not study for a second. So sometimes it's not about how much you study, but how you study. Next, we have historical research, and it involves studying past events, documents, or artifacts to understand the context, causes, and effects of those events. It is mostly used to interpret and analyze historical data to gain key insights into the past behaviors, trends, and conditions. So, folks who take history must be quite familiar with historical research. For example, researching the social impact of the Industrial Revolution by examining historical records and documents. So, historical research. So, anything that's related to past would be under historical research. Next, we have analytical research. Analytical research involves the systematic evaluation and interpretation of the existing information or data to uncover relationships, patterns, or principles. So you have data, and then based on this data, you are analyzing the patterns. It could be correlation, it could be causation, anything. This method is used to critically analyze data or literature to draw conclusions. For example, analyzing statistical data from multiple studies to determine the effectiveness of a medical treatment. Again, observing. It's not like experimental research where you are playing around with one variables and checking the impact of it. So don't get confused there. Next, we have exploratory research. Exploratory research is a preliminary study that aims to investigate and understand a new or poorly understood problem, often used in a more structured research. For example, conducting interviews to explore consumer perception of a new technology before developing a formal survey. A lot of market research, pre market research, would be based on exploratory research to understand whether this particular product would be feasible in the particular market. This method is used by researchers who have limited knowledge about the problem and seeks to explore its dimension, gather initial insights, and generate hypotheses. So, we've studied the 9 types of descriptive research. Can you answer what type are these? You can pause the video, read the questions, and try answering it. If you can't, then join our WhatsApp group. We'll be discussing these answers there, or put it in the comments below. Let's move on. Experimental research. Experimental research involves manipulating one or more variable. Alright, this is manipulating to observe the effect on another variable while controlling for potential confounding factors. So what are the exact factors that are that is affecting this particular variable? Hence you conclude that maybe this factor does play a role. It aims to establish a cause and effect relationship between variables through rigorous experimentation and statistical analysis. So, I'll give you a very interesting example under experimental research, and I was completely obsessed with this particular research when I was studying in my master's in BHU, and it was about misperceived social norms in Saudi Arabia. So, what experiment the researchers conducted were they are divided into two different groups. First, they did a one on one interview with the men. So, apparently, Saudi Arabia has one of the least female labor participation rate. In the pre experiment, it was a one on one interview with all the men, and they were asking questions regarding whether they would be fine with their wife working. Most of them, about I think 70 to 80% of them, said that they would be fine with it when it was a one on one interview. But what was interesting was when they did a group interview with all the men, all the neighbors, then at that time, most of them, about maybe about 90% of them, were not fine with their wives working. So, this had great implications regarding social norms and how it affects the thinking, which then contributes to factors like low female participation rate. So, I was thinking if this study can be applied in cases of Bihar, where there's very low female labor participation rate, or North India, where it's still followed, where women should not work, especially women in upper middle class, where it's a norm that women should be into caregiving responsibilities. So I was very fascinated, but my professor said that this would be a really complicated study for me to do for my dissertation, so I kind of chucked it out. But I'm still fascinated, and if anybody of you would want to take this up, then do it. I feel it's gonna be a really interesting study, or maybe in the future. So this is about it with the example. Let's move on. So, what are the types of experimental research? We have pre experimental research, we have true experiments, and we have quasi experimental research. I've not noticed a lot of questions from types of experimental research, but you have to know because it's there in the syllabus. So, the first type, pre experimental research, it lacks randomization or control group, making them less rigorous but useful in some initial research scenarios. It is of 3 types: one shot case study design, one group pre test post test design, and static group comparison design. Next, we have true experiments. True experimental designs use random assignments to control and experimental groups and are considered the most reliable for determining cause and effect relationship. It is of 3 types again: post test only control group design, pre test post test control group design, and Solomon 4 group design. Third, quasi experimental research. Quasi experiments do not use random assignment of participants to group, but they include more control than pre experimental designs. Non equivalent group designs, interrupted time series designs, control group time series design. A lot of experimental designs is to do with drug use, whether this particular drug will be helpful for this particular disease or not. So it's mostly done through experimental designs because you can control and see. One group is mostly kept as placebo, where you're given the drug and said that it works, and the other group is given the actual drug, and then the difference is seen, and then you come to a conclusion whether this particular drug is useful for treating this particular disease. A lot of these kind of research is based on experimental research. Approach to research. The first approach to research is the deductive approach, and you learn about deductive and inductive research a lot in logic and reasoning, and there are different numerical questions based on this, but it's quite imperative for research as well, because these are the two ways we can approach it. First, you come up with a theory. For example, exercise improves mental health. You've seen a lot of people with good mental health exercise, so you've come up with a theory. You've looked at the big picture. Now, based on this, you create a hypothesis. People who exercise for 30 minutes daily have reduced stress levels. Now, based on this hypothesis, you start observing, you start taking surveys, you have different research techniques that you conduct. Now, post conducting these observations and these surveys, you come up with a conclusion, yes or no, whether exercise improves mental health or not. So, you go from up to down. The deductive approach is a method of reasoning in which conclusions are drawn from a general principle or premises. It involves moving from general to specific. Remember this by heart. Deductive is from general to specific. It comes throughout net paper 1 in different shapes and form, starting with a theory or hypothesis and then testing it through observations or experimentation. In other words, the deductive approach involves making predictions based on existing theories or principles. So, this is it with deductive approach. Inductive is just the opposite. First, you observe several students who study in groups achieve high grades. So, you sit in a library and you've seen different groups. Oh, all these folks get high marks. So, based on these observation, you form a pattern that study sessions done in group lead to better academic performance. Once you do this, you come up with a hypothesis. A group of 5 people studying together come up with more marks. They get different perspectives to answer. They get different perspective to problem, so they get more marks. You come up with a tentative hypothesis, and then you come up with a theory saying group study does improve learning outcomes. So you go from small to big. In inductive research, we move from specific to general. This approach also involves the following 3 steps: observing different phenomena in the world, search for a pattern, make a generalization about what is occurring. Again, scenario based questions. These are very important to test your knowledge whether you've understood or not. If you've not understood, it just means you need to read it again. If you had, well and good, let's move on. But don't forget to revise, because you'll forget. In 24 hours, humans tend to forget almost 80% of what you've studied. So, self study is very important. And the best way to do self study and revision is through active recall. So, by asking you these kind of questions, I'm trying to force your brain to remember and come up with an answer. So, do it. And let's discuss these questions in our WhatsApp group. Moving on, we have action research. I guess more than 20 plus questions have come just from action research. So, it's very, very important. You should know everything related to action research, different examples, different ways it can be used, the process, the exact process of action research. So let's get started. Action research is a systematic inquiry conducted by practitioners within their own context to solve specific problems, improve practices, or enhance understanding. It involves a cyclical process. Everything is a keyword when you're studying action research. Remember it by heart. It involves a process of planning, acting, observing, and reflecting with the aim of generating practical knowledge and driving change. Okay, all these key terms that I'm underlying. It is essentially learning by doing. It was first coined by Kurt Lewin in 1940s. Okay, so a lot of key terms, any key term related to action research, learn it by heart. So this is the cycle that it follows. First is planning, identifying, informing, and organizing. Next is acting, trials, collecting, questioning. Third is observing, analyzing, reporting, sharing. And fourth is reflecting, evaluating, implementing, revisiting. And then once you implement, once you evaluate, you come back to planning. So there was one more thing very similar to action research we had studied in teaching aptitude. What was it? Micro teaching, which was very similar to action research. To say that micro teaching was evolved out of action research, where it also follows a cyclical process of teaching, planning, evaluating, taking feedback, and then you move on in the same way. Next, we have fundamental research and applied research. Fundamental research is also known as pure or basic research, and it is type of scientific inquiry that aims to expand knowledge. Okay, basic and pure knowledge, you have to remember this point. An understanding of fundamental principles and theories without necessarily having immediate practical application. The primary goal of fundamental research is to advance scientific knowledge and contribute to the development of theories, concepts in various fields. If any one of you have watched Big Bang Theory, then Sheldon Cooper, who is a theoretical physicist, does fundamental research, and his roommate Leonard is an experimental physicist. So his research would fall under applied research. Applied research is done post fundamental research. Fundamental researchers come up with a theory, and applied research based on this theory see the practical application of it. An example of this is in the creation of the atom bomb. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer, there's a scene where Oppenheimer, played by Edmund Murphy, realizes that nucleus can be split into two smaller nuclei, releasing energy. As soon as he reads in the newspaper, he knows that from there an atom bomb can be created. So this, knowing that nucleus can be split into two, thus releasing energy, is now converted into practical method, which is creating the atom bomb. So this is applied research and this is fundamental research. Applied research is a type of scientific inquiry that focuses on solving specific practical problem or addressing practical questions, often with direct application in the real world setting. Unlike fundamental research, which seeks to expand knowledge for its own sake, applied research aims to produce practical solution, product, or intervention to address specific issues or meet specific needs. So this is more practical, this is more theory. Next, we have the six thinking hats. And once a while, there's a question popped from this. When I was giving my UGC net exam in 2021, there was a question on this, and I had absolutely no idea where this question from. I got it wrong as well, but here I'm teaching you now. You live and learn. The Six Thinking Hats was developed by Dr. Edward de Bono in an attempt to create a role playing model that helps researchers individuals think. Each hat represents a different type of thinking. So, based on the hat you have to come up with such discussions and problem solving aspects. The yellow hat, sunshine and positivity, optimism, possibilities, upsides, potential. The black hat, caution and skepticism, dangers, threat, risk, drawbacks, worst case scenarios. The green hat, creativity and surprise. So you brainstorm based on all of these. Alternatives, reframing, out of the box ideas, what ifs. Red hat, feeling, reaction, vibes, how we feel, gut instincts, honest emotions, intuitions. The blue hat manages the process, listens, direct attention, integrates, moves forward. The white hat, data, facts, and information, what we know and what we should know. These hats help in improving decision quality, creativity, and interpersonal skills. If you want notes that have been meticulously created with all the latest topics, mind maps, examples, as well as topic wise previous year questions for these notes and flashcards to remember all the concepts, then go to spacedivision.com. You'll get the entire net paper one for just $2.99. All the best.